And for our last talk of the session, we're just taking a little bebop from Oakland. And Patrick Marley Rump is our last speaker this morning in this session. Patrick is the Director of Stewardship Programs at Literacy for Environmental Justice, or LEJ. Patrick earned his degree in Nursery and Garden Center Operation and Landscape Gardening and Contracting at City College of San Francisco. In his role at LEJ, he is the Project and Operations Director for the Urban Greening Programs. He has a lot of responsibilities, and they include developing projects, building partnerships, and securing funding. He also manages a native plant nursery and oversees various urban greening, ecological restoration, stewardship, and workforce development plans. So take it away, Patrick.
Hello. I'm very excited to be able to present and share a little bit about our partnerships and collaborations. I'm going to really focus on one place that's really important to me, Heron's Head Park. I've been working at that park for almost 26 years and have been working at Ledge for 26 years. So it's been sort of a big part of just my experience in the field, and just going to share a little bit about it. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about what is Literacy for Environmental Justice. So we're a community-based organization in Bayview Hunters Point. We were an organization that was born out of an environmental justice movement in an environmental justice community as a way to empower the next generation, to teach the next generation, and to create ways that environmental justice and sustainability could be applied in schools and through stewardship and workforce programs. So some of the programs that we do at Ledge, we have environmental education, so stuff like getting kids out on the water, doing stewardship, visiting our nursery, growing plants. We have a workforce program, which I'll talk about a little bit here in a second. We have our urban greening programs, which are like concrete projects like building a nursery, making a native plant garden, restoring a wetland, growing 50,000 plants for urban stormwater projects on Yerba Buena Island. And then lastly, we have community stewardship. So really trying to get volunteerism and really get that connection to the land. And then ultimately, I think when we're doing our job well, we're doing all four at the same time. I think that's a good day when there's interconnection between those strategies. Let's see, I'll go on to the next slide. So before I talk about the project, I want to talk about our partners. So at Heron's Head Park, the Port of San Francisco is the landowner. They're also like the major champion of the park. They're the person who is really making sure it's funded, that it's supported, that it's developed, that it exists. We have ESA as a major partner in our work at Heron's Head Park. They're doing the design, the engineering work, the technical work, the monitoring. We have the San Francisco State Estuary and Ocean Science Center. They're a unique partner in that they bring in environmental education training and workforce development for our workforce interns. And they've also been really key at like providing specialized plant knowledge around an endangered plant that I'll talk about later. I want to mention Candlestick Point State Recreation Area, which is California's first urban state park. Without Candlestick, we wouldn't have our native plant nursery. So it's a really, really, really critical part of our program structure. Cal IPC has been a huge partner in this, helping us, we work with youth, so we're not going to go out and spray herbicides, but they can kind of do some of the herbicide work, and then our crews can come in and do the follow-up work. They also provide a lot of technical expertise in management strategies for certain weeds. And then San Francisco Rec and Park is also another key partner at this location. They provide the education programs and operate the Environmental Education Center that Ledge actually built at Heron's Head Park. And they're the ones who get the people out, they get the kids out, and they breathe community into the project. I'm going to also talk a little bit about Heron Park. So Heron Park is in southeast San Francisco. This is a good chance to use the laser pointer. You can see that if you look at it upside down, it's actually a heron's head. It was named by a local student who saw it on a map and said, that looks like a heron's head. What's an interesting thing about the park is it's completely made of landfill. So, which is kind of cool, and not really cool, but interesting. So originally, the site was developed to be a shipping terminal, and it never got finished. And it sank back into the bay, and tidal wetlands started to form. This was really significant because in San Francisco, every square inch of our tidal wetlands have been filled in. There's not a single original remnant tidal wetland in San Francisco, so everything is either reclamation by the bay or restoration. Also, I want to point out that it's in this environmental justice community. So this blank space right here was the former Hunters Point PG&E power plant. It was the largest source of stationary air pollution in the Bayview Hunters Point community and in the city of San Francisco for decades. And then over here we have the Hunters Point Shipyard, which is a federal Superfund site, and you could do an entire presentation about that. The restoration of Heron's Head began in the late 90s, and it kind of included expanding the wetlands that were starting to form and creating human-made wetlands, and then opening this dump or landfill into a public open space. And I think that's really, really important in a community like Bayview Hunters Point. Ironically, they call it Bayview, but there is no access to the bay. There's an equity of open space and access to San Francisco Bay in this community, and so it really makes it like a unique treasure within our community. So I'll talk a little bit about, currently the park has happened over phases over the last 20 years. We have two projects underway right now. One is a resilient project to restore 9 acres of mostly invasive grasslands and weeds into a perennial habitat. We have this purple area, which is the existing wetland. We've been working in those areas to remove Algerian sea lavender. We had an explosion of like 3 acres of Algerian sea lavender after the restoration work happened in the late 90s. We've got it down to less than 2% cover at this point, so we're really proud of that. Then there's this like thing that looks like a berm here. This is actually a living shoreline, and then just outside of the living shoreline, there are oyster ball reefs, and soon there will be eelgrass plantings. So it's very cool that you'll have, for the first time in the history of the park, all of the habitats from the upland to the transition zones, to the wetland, and the subtidal are all being restored. And hopefully, in time, or before sea level rise wipes it out. Okay, so the first project that's kind of a 5-year endeavor, this is we're the project lead, Literacy for Environmental Justice. It's a 9-acre project, and we're trying to create like a mosaic of habitats. So in these small ecological habitats, we'd like to have as much resources as possible, because it's, in San Francisco, all of our habitats are fragmented, so you want to be able to provide everything that a species might need in one spot. So we're doing perennial grasslands, we're doing coastal sage scrub, we're doing sandy backshore habitat, we're doing transition zone habitats of coastal sage scrub between the wetlands and the uplands, and we're doing about 6 acres of perennial grassland restoration. We're doing this through, mostly through our job training program. So I want to talk a little bit about that. The crew right here, these are my colleagues. Everybody at Ledge started as an intern. And basically, like almost all of our staff started as interns. So a few years ago, we started this program called the Eco Apprentice Program. It provides 4 or 5 months of 3/4 time paid internships at 21 an hour. It's a very holistic program, so people get to learn about public speaking, leading work days, getting driver's license, things like plant identification, working in the nursery, learning about traditional environmental knowledge, actually working with Ohlone cultural practitioners to learn about plants and to use native plants in our project. So it's a really well-rounded program. And the workforce component is really big because one of the biggest issues in Bayview Hunters Point is economics and lack of jobs. Can I get a time check? I'm sorry. How am I doing? About 5 minutes? Okay, I'll speed it up a little bit. So our other project is the Resiliency Project. These are the different funders who have made that work possible. And I'll talk a little bit about this. So this is the park pre-living shoreline construction. So in the last 20 years, we've lost about 25 to 100 feet of shoreline. And these unique intertidal ponds are starting to breach and flood out and are no longer serving as intertidal ponds. Going to our next slide. This project is looking to, basically this is huge living shoreline. It is a almost an acre of permeable gravel that is shoring up the wetland and protecting it through 2050. It's also creating native habitat on the backside of it for unique plant species. And down here too, we have the oyster reef and soon to do the eelgrass plantings. So one of the key things about this project has been the reintroduction of a federally endangered plant species called Sueda californica. We've been growing these and partnering with the Estuary and Ocean Science Center to collect the seeds in Morro Bay, propagate them at our nursery, and outplant them with our crews. The little structure right here is an arbor. We found that this plant, it's just above the king tides, and it can be arbored up into little tents and can create habitat for species like the clapper rail and other things during storm events. And then on the back side here, it's also like a really effective plant at slowing down the gravel migration of the new living shoreline into the existing wetland here. So kind of serving as a comb. A key part of our program is our native plant nursery. 58 watershed-specific species, 65,000 plants. We're all about hiring locally and growing local plants, local people is our motto. Let's see, we'll go on the next slide. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about some key aspects of what's made this work possible. I would say that it's been the long-term partnerships, it's the deep trust between the port and the different people that I mentioned earlier in the program. I think it's the specific roles that we all play. I think Ledge has been really great about working with the community, knowing our community, knowing the site because we have 26 years of site experience there. But also, we are not engineers. We don't do CEQA permits. We don't fundraise at scale. So sometimes we'll do things like Ledge might play the lead as the fundraiser, or the Port of San Francisco might play the lead. But I can tell you this, without those diverse partnerships and without the connection to the community, much of this work would not have been funded. And I think it's really, building... I think it's what I've seen too is one of my colleagues mentioned the ripple effect. As we've done one project, it leads to the next project, and it leads to the next opportunity. So I think it's really just sort of a continuum of partners. And I'd say definitely champions. If you don't have champions at your core organizations who will fight and really, really work to make this stuff happen, it doesn't happen. And I think if we want to ask ourselves, why does this matter? I can kind of think of two different things. One of the champions, who I won't name, is like, Heron's Head Park isn't going to solve climate change. It's not going to change sea level rise. But what it will do is create, and what it has done is create a community of people who care about these things. It creates hope for the next generation. Through the work that we're doing with the community, it creates connection to a field that has largely been excluded to people of color, intentionally or non-intentionally, over decades. So I think that piece is really, really big. And I'll say another piece that's been really big for me is one of my former apprentices mentioned, he just had this like saying, he was like, we're not just restoring ecology, we're not just restoring parks, we're restoring ourselves. And I think that was a really profound thing for me, because I think at the end of the day, one of the reasons we work outdoors, one of the reasons why we put our hands on the land and do this work is because there is a connection to the planet that we all need. And I think programs like this and collaborations like this make it possible. So, time for questions.
Testing? Yeah, I don't know that area well enough, but looking at your aerial maps provided, does the footprint of the former sports stadium, is it overlap or is it adjacent?
It's actually, as the crow flies, it's on the other side of the Hunters Point shipyard.
Okay.
And it's another site. The stadium is below sea level.
Right.
They've jacked that site up 50, 60 feet so that they can develop it. Because the economy has been so terrible, it's just been sitting there for the last 7 years.
Is a developer trying to build something there, or is it possibly another restoration site?
It's a combination of both. I think the footprint of the stadium, what's interesting at Candlestick is some of the land that was the former stadium is going to the state park, and then some of the state park land is going to the developer at that site. And sadly, I think it's been kind of held in suspension because the economy has been so terrible. And I kind of think after they cut Kaepernick, that site's cursed. But we are hopeful. There is like some really ambitious, great plans for the Candlestick area, and there is a state park that wraps all the way around the former footprint of the stadium.
Thanks.
Hi. What has been the biggest obstacle at the native plant nursery for producing the volume that you need for your projects?
Well, I think Phytophthora was a big one. We recently redid our nursery about 2 years ago, so we were able to rebuild with all new BMPs in place. But I think since we started our nursery when we were growing 5,000 or 6,000 plants a year, and then the demand for native plants and the use of native plants in nature-based solution projects and urban greening projects and for green infrastructure has just magnified the need for native plants. So before we rebuilt, I think it was really challenging to kind of do all the good BMPs that kind of were developed in the last 5 or 10 years. I'd still say space. We never have enough space. I think those are two of the big ones.
Hi, can you talk a little bit more about your living shoreline, like the process of getting that in, if it changed the hydrology dynamics affecting the plant community?
It's been totally fascinating. So I think it's one of only a few living shorelines that have been built at this scale. And I think the hope is that in the next 10 years, there's a program called RALS, Regionally Advancing Living Shorelines in San Francisco Bay. And so this is kind of a test model. It's performed really, really well. It's 2 years old, so it's been through 2 major storm events. It's interesting because it's permeable, so like you're basically planting in gravel. So when we go out and plant, we kind of have to time it with high tides so the plants can get watered through the permeability, through the tide going through the crest of the berm. And it was a huge engineering feat. They were able to use San Francisco Bay dredge, and that was stored at an adjacent site. And then they actually brought these like big cranes in to dump it in and kind of build it slowly. It's got a feeder beach at one end, so it sort of like pushes gravel towards like the more low energy environments. And we've seen natural plant colonization. The endangered sea blight is thriving. We're actually like the largest population in San Francisco Bay now for a plant that was like completely extirpated from San Francisco Bay. So I think it's really exciting. My hope is that these sort of like living shorelines and green infrastructure ideas will be built at scale so that we still have a city like San Francisco, and so that places like Foster City and West Oakland and these areas that are basically going to be underwater in the next 50 to 60 years still exist. Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.